There is a huge difference, and I mean a huge difference, between old school Dungeons and Dragons made by a company known as TSR and new school Dungeons and Dragons made by a company known as WotC or Wizards of the Coast. And what is the huge difference? It's mindset when it comes to what this is. WotC treats it like a pure game. That's all you got to understand. It's treat it like a pure game, and anything that is a negative experience, well, they try to avoid it as best they can. And they've created a system with all kinds of checks and second checks and re-rolls, all so you can avoid failing or avoid character death or avoid all kinds of different things within the game that make the game, for many people, a very negative experience. I am an old school person. I took part in the tabletop role-playing game hobby as early as the late 80s. And I came in around that old school era playing TSR Dungeons and Dragons. You know what I learned right away? It really wasn't a game. Like, winning or losing really didn't matter. Success or failure of dice rolls really wasn't the big issue. It was about your character and then just dealing with things as they come, win, lose, or fail. And actually, failure was to be assumed. We went into the game as if you're going to fail. It's like you're the thief. You're going to pick the lock, right? Well, old school players would understand there's a good chance they'll break their lock picks, they'll fail, and then how do we bust the door down? Do we bust the door down? Do we go through? And it becomes a mind game because, when you lose the elements, that relate to the rules and the dice, like, oh, you're going to pick the thing, but you can't, it broke. So now what? You just can't get in to the room? That's not the way it was. And it becomes a mind game where you expect to fail. There's an expectation of failure, and you don't get bothered by failure because there's an expectation of it. You don't go in going, oh man, I failed again. You just go in and go, okay, fail, what do we do? Because we fail so often in old school that you become numb to the failure. And actually, it wasn't really failure to us in the old school. Failure was just the dice failed us. That rule, that system failed us. But now we can think for ourselves. Try to convince the DM that there are other ways to get into the room and try different things. And there might not be a system set up for, the thousands of different things we could think to do. So the DM or the game master needs to come up with some ideas of how to deal with that. What kind of dice roll to use for that. And there was a lot of tools, like there isn't any other game, like ability scores and whatnot, where you could use those as, to format a new system of how are you getting into that room. New school players that play WotC D&D, they think of the game very differently. They look at all the options. How can I get a reroll? How can I get a plus to work out in my favor? Anything to avoid failure. And the game is all about trying to give you, the player, the best chance of playing the game without failure. With all the extra options, all the things you could take. The game designers don't care about that. They're actually making a game towards that gamey aspect. You go back to old school, and we seen it as a game, but we never seen it like a video game. Everything was less important as far as the gaming aspect. Like combat, it's something important to the game, but it's going to be short, quick, deadly. There's not too many outs. You can die really easily, so you got to be cautious. You got to be careful. And you don't go through old school thinking you're going to win all the time. You assume loss, but then you got to come up with ways of how do you get around that without the rules giving you a reroll. Without that, so it becomes a challenge on you, the player, to really think outside the box. It becomes a real mind game, right? When I go to a new school guy And I take him out of the zone of the re-rolls and all this, and I say, okay, man, you ran out of everything. Now what? Now, because all you have left is what you could think up and pitch to the DM, and then you got to hope that DM is open-minded to hear your ideas, because the rules aren't on your side. As far as there's no system saying your ass is covered on this one, what do? Most new school guys absolutely collapse when you put that on them. Or if you go to the old school, that's the game right there. You assume failure most of the time, so you're down to what can you pitch at a game master to get, and there's an expectation that you're going to try that. That is actually part of the system of old school. Old school game masters understood that. They understood that if the rules flopped, right, it's left down, it's a challenge to players to think of things that would help them get them over something, or to a degree, accept the failure that they can't get into the room, and move on. Right? It's old school was this way of, it just got you out of winning is the most important thing. The experience. So it didn't matter that you couldn't pick the lock and get through the door. It's how you get through, and then you talk about that story later. We weren't mad about failing. All we were concerned about was we were together for the experience. Okay, you fail, how'd you get through it? Don't focus on failure and crying about it. How did you get through it? That's why when it came to the new school catering to what us old school guys that liked old school, we seen it as weakness. Because compared to what we're doing, if you came into the game we were playing and said, oh, I can't handle thinking for myself, we would look down on you. So when we seen WotC come out, or Wizards of the Coast come out with a D&D made that would lean into what we've seen as weaker players, right? Allowing them to bypass thinking by giving them all these extras and all these extra rules, and continuing that framework of gamey and a focus on you really have a chance of successfully going through the game without needing to think based on the rules, without losing your character, without failing to get into the room that you're trying to get into. Like, it's made for your success, and that's why new school guys frown at failure. You think it's just character death that the new school frowns at? No, they frown at all forms of failure. They're not big on failure. They want to succeed. Now, I played recently, I've been playing that Baldur's Gate 3 game. Now, the gaming aspects from the new school going into that makes sense because it's a video game. And I get it. I played the video game and I understand through the video game. In a video game format, that stuff can be fun. But for me personally, if I take that type of gameplay from Baldur's Gate 3 to the table, that's not what I'm looking for at the table. I'm not looking for a gamey game. I'm looking for something that challenges me. Now, is every aspect of old school my cup of tea? No, I didn't like original or AD&D first edition. Though I ran them and played them, didn't like them. I preferred second edition because it eased up on some of the more tighter areas, which I did agree with. I get where the new school comes from. It's just I think the new school took things far past the point I would in the wrong direction. So then what you're doing becomes completely different than what you're doing before. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to completely change what D&D is by simply changing how people approach it can be a major thing. Like, now they approach it looking for the reroll instead of wondering, okay, likely, if I get to find a trap, I'm not going to. Probably going to fail that dice roll. Can I bring some tools that would help me find traps regardless of my flaws, my character's flaws, right? And we would think that way, and that's a good way to think. Like, you accept your character's weaknesses instead of just, you want to be strong at every dice roll. You know there's a good chance you won't succeed, especially early. Now, some of that is too tight even for me on gameplay. And I get where WotC was going. I get where 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition was aiming. I think they went too far and destroy what the game is, and they destroy what the focus of the game is, right? But I think there was a much tighter element, so tight that I do think the experience for most people with first edition AD&D and original was not good. It just wasn't good. Sold well when, especially when AD&D first edition came out, but after a short period of time and attempts to do tournament play, the player base died. It just went away. I mean, it literally ran away from the game, and there was other systems like Palladium and that could have picked me up. Like the vampire games. I mean, it's not like they had a whole history or a built-in audience, so when they come out, the only reason for them having success is because there's been a lot of people already in the tabletop role-playing game hobby. They had already abandoned D&D. So before 2nd edition comes out, you get the vampire games getting a boost, Palladium getting a boost, and then 2nd edition came out just a little too late for TSR. It just never got the hype, and people weren't willing to really take the same chance on 2nd edition or not as many people were willing to take the chance on 2nd edition as they did on 1st edition AD&D, because 1st edition AD&D hurt TSR for this one main reason, in my opinion. The game made a shitload of promises and then lived up to absolutely none of them. Every player, every person I know that purchased AD&D 1st edition that wasn't in on the know, which is like 99% of people at the time. I talked to people that purchased it and just stopped playing it. Like, what was the gimmick? Why? And it's a similar story for almost every person. They give me things like, I'm supposed to play a hero out in the field, fighting a dragon, being a champion. But here's what they find out. They're going to be a nobody, and they're likely never going to play up to a level that will make them a somebody. They'll play a nobody character and retire as a nobody character for the most part. And on top of being a nobody character, they're not going to be a hero. They're going to be greedy, going through mud, in a dungeon. It's going to be negative, terrible, not out in the sun, being a champion, kicking ass. You got to understand how AD&D 1st edition was sold to the people compared to what was given. Like, what the experience was compared to the art. Because you look at the art, you look at what people are saying about it, and you're like, man, there's so much that can be done with this. I can't wait till we get into it. I'm going to be this fucking knight. I'm going to go fight a dragon. And then you get into AD&D 1st edition, and like most players, you never encounter a dragon. Ever. Some players in AD&D 1st edition did, but I know many players that played it for literally decades and never encountered a dragon. Never play a character, and it's not like they have bad DMs, just happen to not work out, right? Guy ends the games early, might only run a campaign up to level 6, doesn't bother putting a dragon in there, or for the few horror stories, old school, you put a dragon in there, well, that can go south real fast. And combat was meant to sort of go south in old school. It was, you might think it's a broken feature, but it was something that I think was more meant to be realistic to a degree, but it was too tight. Like old school AD&D 1st edition, it was too much of a meat grinder. Even if you tried to not be a meat grinder, it was too easy to fall into one. And that's something with just a little bit of ease, a few extra hit points early on, could change the entire experience on that end and not make the game a whole meat grinder. Yet the old school were unwilling to make a change, and if you keep getting your own way and you're unwilling to make a change, sooner or later the market will speak and somebody will come in, like Watsy did, purchase D&D and say, okay, you weren't willing to make the change? We are. 2nd edition was an attempt to make a change. There was a lean into it, but it was too late. A 2nd edition didn't put the company out of business. It was already going out of business before 2nd edition came out. 2nd edition was just a gamble when people had already failed. And then they got desperate. They started making all kinds of splat books for the game. Anything that would sell. They did everything they could to stay afloat. It's just too many broken promises with AD&D 1st edition. A lot of old school guys that are AD&D guys, that are 1st edition AD&D guys, they don't like to admit this, but yeah, AD&D 1st edition was a package of promises never fulfilled. If you're supposed to be the hero, you're supposed to be this. You're not playing a hero. You're playing some fucking guy who's a nobody. He's going to run through the mud in a dungeon, and that's going to be your life. Likely, you'll never get to the end of a campaign with him. Might be your third character that you travel to the end of the campaign with. Maybe. Old school meat grinder. So easy. So many negative elements that people just didn't like. Now, there's some people that just love. They marry the failure. Like, I'm old school. I marry the failure. I expect failure. I expect hardcore death. But even I liked the ease up in some of the areas a game like AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, 2nd edition offered. Now, a lot of people say it's because of 2nd edition, you get 3rd edition, all this. I'm like, well, no. If you say 2nd edition inspired this, I say you're lying. But 2nd edition, you can definitely see where, yeah, the company realized AD&D 1st edition didn't do it, so they're leaning away from it. And I've noticed something else. WotC is not influenced by the old school tabletop role-playing game community whatsoever. Like, I mean, the lack of influence is so obvious. It looks like they have rejected what that community says about them or what they say they could do and do better. They'll make fun of the Thaco thing, WotC will. They seem to just reject that community in general. I've heard staff members from WotC just say they don't care what these people over here think. And they really don't. And you can see a major lack of influence on the game design from 3rd edition right up until 5e. You know, I have a hard time being interested in some video gamey game like WotC D&D. And even if you tried to be creative in that game, it's all going to lean towards the rules because the game is set up that way. You'll feel pressure to wonder how you get the reroll, even if you're trying to be creative in your character creation mode for a WotC D&D game. You're still going to think of the gamey aspects over just about everything else. The gamey aspect of New School is so powerful that no matter how much a guy like Matt Mercer focuses on character development, characters, and creativity, most of the people playing 5e play it more like a gamey game. You know, it's weird. I see Matt Mercer try to run a more creative game that is something that would lean more to the old school than it does to the new school. And even the people that seem to come in saying they're fans of Mercer, when you go watch them play 5e or run 5e, they run it more like a game and less like what Mercer does. And even the deeper story line with Baldur's Gate 3, not bad. I don't like some of the aspects, but I mean just big story. Go to a normal 5e game. That's not what you see. They still lean more into the gamey aspects. Now in a video game, that's fine. At the table, it's not the experience I want, but I can understand when my mindset is completely different from the new school. It's why my videos about gaming or how I think you should approach it, really, a lot of new school guys have a hard time relating to it because they're hearing me talk about character development. They're just like, I'm here to play a game. And I get that. I do get that with new school guys. When they say things like that to me, I'm sympathetic to that point of view. Look, dude, it's like, Steven, I'm here to play a fucking game, dude. Like, I don't want to be in a fucking drama class. I don't want to be all this. I just want to play a game. And I want to play a simple game. A game where I don't have to think much and I can just play. Well, I get that. But a tabletop role-playing game is a mind game. So when you need a break mentally, this is not the type of... That game is not meant to fill that role. It's when you want to escape the real world, but your mind's active, you're creative. That's when you come into the stressful gaming world of a tabletop role-playing game, mind game. Yet, in the new school WotC, it's gotten away from what tabletop role-playing games are, which is a mind game. It is a game where you can just depend on the re-rolls and just about everything else to avoid thinking. To avoid a lot of the thinking that would would be required in old school if you want to achieve most things. So you'll fail so often that if you want to get in the door or get something, if not, you'll keep missing the thing because you'll fail quite often. So you won't be getting that, and after a certain while, you have to either go, do I just give up on all these losses or do I do something about it? And it means you got to think your way into the room, right? And to a lot of new school guys, that's hard work. That really is. Like, put that on them in the middle of the game. Hey man, you ran into everything. It's happened like 7 times in a row to them, and they want to get in the fucking room to get the thing. And now they gotta think. They're just not ready for that. That's not the game they're playing. So you can see the huge difference, and this is why old school guys look at the new school guys that have it that easy, and you'll notice that old school will talk about the new school like they're mentally weak. Look, I get it. It's just a different view of what it is. And is it really their fault? This is what WotC offers. This is a gamey game. This is the mindset they've created in their player base. And their player base accepts this stuff more than we could ever imagine. So that is the spread, the difference between the old school and the new school. And this is why we don't really game together unless you can find a game like Shadow Dark where some people will meet in the middle in a game like that. But that game is not like a long-lasting game for a lot of people. I know a lot of people that will pick up Shadow Dark, play it for a bit, put it down, and go back to whatever version or edition of D&D that they normally game with, right? So I just get it. I'm just saying I understand. It's an observation of the difference between the two communities and why we don't get along. Like, why our old school's view of D&D is so vastly different. Because, in a way, it is completely a different game. Because you're playing it a different way. It's just so different. The approach is gamey with the WotC, and it's more about just mind game, less gamey push. It's more simple in its format with old school, but that simple becomes very challenging because the answer's not there and you've got to come up with the answer, right? The difference is most of the answers are all in front of you in the new school. If you fail, there's all kinds of other options, answers, everything. Like, you're just looking at option A, B, or C and trying to choose the right one. That's the majority of the new school game, right? You pick the right option, and most of the time you hope the dice go your way. Like, the math goes in your favor. And that is obviously given, by the pluses and all these other benefits you can gain with just about every character towards the dice rolls that are going to be very important for that character in the game. It's just that the old school did not concern itself with the success of the character based on dice rolls. It just said, here's a game, succeed or fail, doesn't matter to us. That was sort of how it was. It was like you can succeed in the fight, but it's very tight. But that's meant to somewhat be, the way old school will look at it, is realistic. It is that dangerous to be in a fight. It is that dangerous to be in a trap. And it can be over in a heartbeat, and things can happen like that. And there's hints of the aspects of that in the new school, but really new school is more about what I'm saying. Giving you more options to avoid it. Pick A, B, or C. A lot less thinking for yourself. I find the new school numbs the minds out of the people taking part, even the people that run the game. Old school DM, man, I got to be ready to be challenged with 50 million things that the game has not prepared me for. It's giving me some tools, but it's telling me really, here's some tools, here's some help, but you really got to do it on your own. With the new school is, the book runs the game. You're just a middle person between the book and the player. And the book has authority over the new school. Now that is true when you get to first edition AD&D and original D&D, but the last edition of Dungeons and Dragons that TSR made, second edition AD&D, it finally got away from that period, right? Where it's no longer is the book the authority over the game. No, that's just a guide. The authority over the game is the game master. And you can see a lot less fighting with second edition. It sort of cured that problem. Where you can still find a lot of conflict with first edition because players could easily call it a first edition D&D DM, like AD&D DM, by just saying, well, the book says this. Because the book had authority over the Dungeon Master. That's true with 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition. And the game does try to answer everything. You'll be challenged with something as a DM. You'll be like, man, what do I do? Well, if you're new school, don't worry. Take a look at the book. You'll probably find your answer. In old school, there's only so many things, so you know right away. Shit, there's not a rule for that. Like, you'll know. There's no guessing. You don't got to look it up. So now you got to, do I use ability scores? Do I just randomly decide a dice roll? How do I deal with this? And then you got to do it right to keep people coming back. Like, if you made up a new rule for this, that has to be consistent. So you got to note that, use it again later, shit like this. It really becomes a craft, right? Because you got to do work. The game isn't holding your hand. It's not protecting you. And that, what old school did was, it, especially with 2nd edition, it found some of the most talented people in the hobby. Right? The most intelligent, talented people. Now, there's just some people in there that are motor dead. There's no doubt old school is full with a lot of people that, you know, the simple thinking of how to get into the room doesn't mean you need to be a fucking genius. So we get a lot of fucking brain dead people in the old school, but they don't care about winning. And actually, to succeed and have to do all that thinking is just, they like the excuse that failure is a common thing. You find weaknesses in all areas of a hobby or life or anything. We have it in the old school as much as people have it in the new school. But I don't really blame the new school. WotC developed this, and the old school made itself irrelevant for years, to the point where it was easy to dismiss what was being said on this side of the fence. So there's a mindset developed in the new school which you can't change. So people in the old school are like, well, we're going to win one day. I'm like, your game is so anti what the majority want. And their expectations now, that if a game ever comes by that takes out D&D, it has to be a game that has the aspects, some of the aspects they're looking for. The old school doesn't. That's why the OSR could never take over the market. That's why old school clones could never take over the market. Right? And they can fill a need, they can make some money, but they can never just take over the place of D&D. D&D gets certain elements that, right, in a way there's a hint that players always wanted the stuff, even if it's done terribly. So it's those aspects are still not being introduced, even to the clones, even to the creative stuff in the OSR. You still don't see that stuff at all. It really is in the new school, and there's really nothing coming along right now challenging that. Now, personally, I put out a game, the Neo TTRPG System, which I feel does, you know, find a middle ground with that, right? Does lean into the old school aspect of making you think, but it still has some options. It's that middle ground of a tabletop role-playing type of game where it understands that I want you to think, but I also want you to be clever. And yeah, there'll be some chances to re-roll something or check something out or find something else to get through where the option is there. But it's not always. But it's just a mix. There's more than old school, say the D&D world, and there's not as much junk as the new school, right? The game isn't attempting to make sure you survive through the rules, which is what the new school does. On top of being gamey, it's really looking to make it that you don't fail, right? You probably fail more in Baldur's Gate 3 than you would at the actual table in a 5e game. That's how much people avoid failure at the table. It's part of the habit and part of the mindset. So that's it. That's where we are. And I don't think we could ever... You can understand it, but you can't get the new school to change. Like, if you're old school and you expect them to change, that's not happening. This is where it's at. And it's probably going to be a few generations of that passed down from that. So it's this generation, the next generation of gamers for tabletop role-playing games will be in that mindset and less in the old school. Because the old school just hasn't had that type of sway, influence. Like, it's still, like, even the OSR's popularity, the purchasing still comes from the same people that were kids playing it back in the 80s, purchasing it now. It's not like a bunch of new school guys gave, their purchasing power over to the OSR. So the old school really hasn't grown. It hasn't had a major influence whatsoever on the hobby in any real way, to the point where WotC, the most influencing factor there is, has completely ignored the old school. Like, they just have no sway over WotC editions of D&D. They've been left behind. Now, they can focus on their own, but they've been left behind. So I would say that for the next so many generations of players and possible game masters, the influence just will not come in any major way from the old school, sadly. Because you need to find a gap. But the old school wants to stay so old school, the majority of them rather stay around a game like AD&D First Edition instead of looking at Second Edition going, maybe Second Edition is that meet in the middle type of gaming aspect. Now, for a lot of Second Ed guys, they would agree with me. They get what I'm saying, right? But there's just a lot of people that just don't bother because that game came a little too late into the thing, and it's a great middle game, but it's right? There. So that's the difference. I think there's just a gap between new school and old school that can't be fixed because it's two different games. You can call new school D&D, it's just not the same D&D as old school. And it's so vastly different. The mindsets are different. The way we approach it, like both games have elves, but the way we play them is just so different from each other. So different that that's just part of it. Now, if you came late into D&D and you're not really part of the old school, I could see why you're somewhat in the middle of the ground. You like 5e and you think that's okay. Maybe you're just not used to that old grind, right? Maybe you're like one of the many people from the old grind world that just didn't like it, got turned off by it. Hey, it's part of what got a lot of people to watch it. All right, there you go. There's my take. I don't know. I don't know where I just, it's an observation where I don't really have a solution, but it's something I thought I should share because I think it's not mentioned enough. People don't really get it enough, and both sides hate each other for various reasons, which is silly. And I think just where we're at makes more sense to me than it doesn't. And I think people, if you want to ever get somewhere where there's better communication, you have to start off understanding what's going on. Like if there's a break, you got to understand what's broken to fix it. And even if I don't get a solution, a lot of people don't even know where it's broken. And I think I'm painting up clearly some of the areas where it's broken and telling you how there's a break between one crowd and another crowd. And I just don't think you can bridge that gap without both groups giving up something they like. Like there's a middle, but you can't stay AD&D First Edition and meet up with the new crowd. There's a middle, but you can't stay 5e and meet up with the old crowd. Right? There's a middle line. Problem is, the loudest voices in the hobby, especially in the old school, it's their way or the highway. No middle ground, baby. I believe in the middle ground. And I believe until you finally look for it, you're stuck where you're at. Things will never just work out your way. Like, hey, I'm with AD&D First Edition after all these decades. Finally, we're going to win. Finally. Yay, I've been waiting for this. Like, no, that's not happening, dude. It's not going to win. The OSR is not going to win with that clone. It's not going to. The only way for the new school and old school to come together in any real way is they find a middle ground game that brings both together. And because there's aspects that are really good from old school that are completely just non-existent in new school. All right? And they ease up on some of the grindier parts of old school that is presented in new school. There's some credibility there. Both sides have it. And it's like, how do we maintain the good from the old and take some of the good ideas or the good principles from the new and mix these together to get something more in the middle? And even with Castle and Crusades, I don't think anybody has done it. Oh, lots of people might claim they have. Game developers might claim they have. I say they haven't. I think Second Edition is the closest thing we have to it. Not Castles and Crusades. Sorry, just my opinion. Second Edition is the closest thing to a real middle ground between the new school and the old school. Yeah, Maybe one day people will get that. Maybe second edition one day will get its props. Because it spent a lot of years being criticized and not getting its props. And I think second edition, in my opinion, is the best of the TSR editions. And I think it really is advanced beyond first edition. Even though people that like first edition will be offended by me saying that, that's my honest take. Right? Okay. Take care.